Thank you very much, Dr. Sityakin. Let me just introduce our next speaker. The next speaker is Petr Chalupecky, who is a permanent representative of the Czech Republic to NATO. Mr. Chalupecky is a Prague Charles University graduate in economy and international relations field. He served as a diplomat to Czech embassy to Washington and is a senior official in foreign ministry in Prague. And Mr. Chalupecky will present us a Central European perspective on the NATO BMD system. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Magin, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for this opportunity to speak here at this conference. It certainly has been an inspirational and an interesting day. I've learned a lot since this morning, actually. Secondly, let me apologize. I have no fancy pictures, let alone comic strips. But then again, I'm a public official. I'm not my job is not as fascinating as that of the researchers here at this and other institutes. So please bear with me. I'll try to make it as enjoyable as possible, if it is possible. So the topic of my intervention here would be the Central European perspective on NATO's ballistic missile defense. I'll probably start with the Czech perspective, because you probably recall that the Czech Republic was at a certain point in time an active participant in negotiations on missile defense, the so-called third site of the United States in Europe. Then I'll try to extrapolate that to a more of a Central European perspective on ballistic missile defense. Throughout the process, I'll touch upon our negotiations or prospective negotiations with Russia during our third site negotiations, but also throughout the process in NATO, before Lisbon, after Lisbon, and lastly, I'll try to predict what might happen with NATO's ballistic missile defense in the near and medium term. Well, first of all, let me start with some 5 years ago, or maybe 6 years ago, when you recall that the Czech Republic was one of the contenders in Europe for a part of the so-called third site, which was a ground-based, interceptor-based missile defense system of the United States. You know that the original plan under the George W. Bush administration was to place a mid-course radar on the territory of the Czech Republic and ground-based interceptors on the territory of Poland. These would serve as a countermeasure against the nuclear, or not only nuclear, the ballistic missile threat to Europe and the United States, and complement the previous two sites that already are or were located and still are located, obviously, in the United States. Well, the reasons why the Czech Republic was actually eager to take part in this endeavor were numerous, but let me name just a few. First of all, we acknowledged the existence of the threat. We acknowledged that the threat was credible, not maybe imminent, but credible enough to actually embark on this endeavor to take part in the missile defense system. Secondly, the motivation was technological or technologically related, which meant we were eager to get some missile defense related know-how. We were eager to get some high-tech technologies into the Czech Republic, to the country, to the area. And thirdly, the reasons were political, and those political reasons stem from three major pillars. First of all, bilateral. It was always a good thing to have a major ally present on our territory, first of all, but also a very strong relationship with this major ally. Secondly, and we were very vocal about that, we saw this as an opportunity to strengthen NATO's capabilities as such. That is, not only actually gaining some advantage for the Czechs and Americans, but also for NATO as such, and we were extremely vocal in that from the very start. We were for the so-called NATOization of the whole system. And thirdly, obviously the sophistication of the systems that would be put into NATO's use through this first bilateral cooperation, but later on let's say, spread cooperation within NATO was something that we aimed for as well, and that is why we coming to the next big summit at that time, the Bucharest Summit of 2008. We, together with the United States, but also others, were extremely vocal in making this bilateral endeavor as much a part of NATO's ballistic missile defense strategy for the future as possible. We succeeded in a way. I think NATO recognized in Bucharest 2008 that this U.S. Arrangement, the U.S. System, would be a part, or would actually be recognized as a substantial contribution to the alliance's capabilities in ballistic missile defense. So it was not a total success, but it was at least an acknowledgement on the side of NATO that this endeavor has some sense. Throughout the whole process, I must say, because we're talking about Russia here in this block, Russia was a partner in the negotiations, especially for the Americans, but also for us in a way. Russia was a difficult partner, as you might imagine. We spent numerous hours talking to the Russians to what extent they'd have access to any potential capability that would be placed on the Czech territory. We had numerous discussions about whether they're going to have permanent access or whether they'd have permanent presence at a potential site. That's a big difference stemming from, is there going to be a Russian official at the facility, or is it going to be a procedure through which a Russian official can apply for visiting the facility at a certain point? I mean, this was a tremendously difficult topic in the negotiations. At the same time, the Russians did not waste any chance to actually let us know that it's the Americans who are the partners for them and not the Czechs. So you can imagine us, it being our territory, trying to get involved in the negotiations was not always as easy as you might imagine. What we learned throughout the process about Russia in 2007 and 2008 was that the primary reason, and we'd heard all the arguments before. The system's going to obviously disrupt the strategic balance. That it's going to be a threat to the Russian strategic arsenal. So we've heard all this before. But at the same time, there were signals that the genuine motivation for the Russians to actually complicate the ballistic missile defense components in Central Europe is different, and it's strictly geopolitical. And among all those signals, there were numerous quotations by and statements by the Russian officials, especially to the Americans, when the Russians would come and say, "You can place the ballistic missile defense assets to Turkey, we wouldn't mind, but if you place it to Central Europe, it's a problem." So in this sense, let me agree here with Emily Landau here that it was a so-called Cold War thinking on the Russian part, in a sense that they were sending strong signals towards the Americans: do not touch the East and do not touch the Central European area, especially in terms of building capacities of such sophistication. Now that was the pre-Obama period. Now something happened in 2008 and 2009. There was U.S. elections in November 2008, and what happened after that was a period of contemplation on the part of the United States on whether the Bush GBI-based system is actually the solution for Europe, or whether there are other ways for Europe and the United States, or whether there are other ways to counter the ballistic missile threats. During those were pretty painful months for us, I must say, because what the Czech administration was doing was trying to persuade the United States to go on with that, about the readiness of the Czechs to actually be on board. At the same time, the domestic political situation was such that it was really difficult to obtain a solid approval by the Czech Parliament that would kind of enable the whole arrangement to go forward. So we were kind of entangled in this chicken and egg game for about a year, where the Americans were looking at the Czechs and pretty much stating that the Czechs were not able to deliver a solid guarantee that there'd be a domestic political support for the thing, whereas the Czechs were looking at the Americans, who were contemplating different options at the time, who were not able to actually send a very strong signal to the Czechs to help us with obtaining the political support for the whole thing. So what it resulted in was a new system, was a new announcement, not very sensibly announced on the 17th of September, especially for our Polish colleagues, but a new announcement of the EPAA system in 2009. I think you all know the reasons. When the Americans came to Prague and Warsaw, they cited a few reasons. The first of them was the more flexibility vis-a-vis the threats. They acknowledged that the intercontinental missile threat is not the most imminent, that there are short-range missiles, that there are medium-range missiles, and maybe intermediate-range missiles, in some time, that are the most pressing problems, and that is why the GBI interceptors would probably not be the best way to counter these threats. So that's why they actually opted for the SM-3 based defense. Then there were technical reasons in the sense that the SM-3 was there. It was there on the Aegis ships, and it was something that would be easily built upon. Then there were economic reasons. The SM-3 much cheaper than the GBI interceptors. But at the same time, the Czechs kind of had a different reading, and not only the Czechs, I must say, it was the Poles and the Hungarians as well, and all the Central Europeans had a different reading of another motivation that was not cited that often at that time, and that was the willingness of the United States, or the readiness of the United States, to actually start a new chapter with Russia, and politically trying to appease the Russians to a way that they might build upon a warmer atmosphere in the early Obama years for achieving other goals, like the New START, for instance. And I think these notions that were very strong in Central Europe, and still are, I must say, resulted in things like the Central European letter to the White House, which you might recall, and which the Obama administration tended to hate so much, and we tended to kind of explain so much after that. So that was something that we saw. Some might even say in some of the more cynical observers in the Czech Republic might actually say that one of the other reasons, except for the political and stuff, was the prevailing of the Raytheon-tied lobbyists over the Boeing-tied lobbyists. But we don't know anything about that. So it's just some of the more cynical observers there in Central Europe might say that. So that's what happened in 2009, and that's when NATO actually, with full speed, if anything like that is even possible in the 28-nation organization, with full speed embarked on the way to work on the EPAA, to work on the incorporation rather of the EPAA to the NATO ballistic missile defense system. That is, taking it as an American contribution to something that we called at the time Alt BMD, which is the active layered theater ballistic missile defense, and plugging it into that and waiting for other nations to contribute and to plug their own national contributions, which after all would result in this nice NATO backboned system with a lot of national assets plugged into it. And this is where we are now. Actually, we're kind of walking in that direction. We are at the very start. That Lisbon, that Chicago rather was extremely. That Lisbon the Lisbon Summit gave another very strong political push to these endeavors, and Chicago saw the interim capability of NATO ballistic missile defense declared, and we're actually proceeding in the direction of having the EPAA based NATO ballistic missile defense here. Now, the Czech position obviously ceased or the Czech involvement decreased rapidly after the 2009 decision of the U.S. administration. So we're not a party of the major ballistic missile defense deliberations in NATO. It's Poland, it's Romania now, it's Turkey, it's Spain, but it's also Germany and the Netherlands who, unlike others, actually put the money where their mouths are and acquiring assets that would be part of the whole NATO ballistic missile defense system. But we still are strong supporters, and we're strong supporters of the components being in Central Europe. And it doesn't really matter much to us that they're not going to be in the Czech Republic. It's very important for us that they'd be in Poland. It's very important for us that they'd be in Romania as well. Because the reason, I'm not going to repeat those, but they're still there. I mean, apart from the NATO infrastructure being rather uneven for obvious reasons in terms of geography, the ballistic missile defense assets in the East are extremely important for the overall, I think, solidarity, the cohesion and the feeling of let's say, solidarity among allies, East and West. So that is an extremely important political thing, and we think this is something that shouldn't be underestimated. That is why we welcomed the groundbreaking ceremony in Romania a couple of months ago, and that is why we strongly support finishing the ballistic missile defense. Even in Poland, including the phase 3, which I'm going to talk about in a little while. But let me just revert to cooperation with Russia in the post-2009 period for us. I think the Russian drive and the Russian goal here remained pretty much the same. That is to either gain maximum control over what's going on in the ballistic missile defense realm in NATO, or, and that would probably be the best solution of all, to cancel the project altogether in Europe. And I think any political sugarcoating, any political paperwork that goes over it is rather transparent if you look at the history of the Russian attitude in negotiating potential cooperation with NATO on missile defense. Now, having said that, we see a potential in cooperating with the Russians. We see a potential in shared early warning. There are meaningful assets that the Russian Federation has, including the Voronezh radars we saw recently, that should certainly boost up the awareness picture we would have in NATO on missile threats. That is why we are strongly supported. We are strong supporters of the two joint centers with the Russians, the Data Fusion Center and the Planning and Operations Center that Ambassador Bershpa was talking about earlier this morning. The fact that the Russians do not view this as a priority, the legal issues are the priority. We kind of note that, but we think it's unfortunate that we do not work together on that, because especially the second center, the Planning and Operational Center, would certainly give Moscow a reasonable deep insight into what NATO's ballistic missile defense plans and procedures are, without actually compromising some kind of information security without the alliance. So this is really a major step ahead, and it is unfortunate that the Russians won't react to that. Now, we were among the countries when in Lisbon, at the Lisbon Summit, everyone declared rather optimistically, I think, that now there's a new chapter for the Russian NATO cooperation in missile defense. We were the ones who'd say, hey, let's wait and see. I mean, this might not result in extreme success. Let's wait and see, given our experience, obviously, with the Russians. Medvedev came just a couple of minutes later and said, hey, we got this beautiful sector approach here where we can divide the European continent into sectors, and Russia's going to be responsible for this one. You guys are going to be responsible for that one. I think that was a no-go from the very start, and that gave you an insight on what the negotiations with the Russians might look like later on, and that really didn't sound very optimistic. So that's when Shoigu announced 2 months ago that Russia is taking a break in missile defense negotiations with NATO, and that they're going to start working bilaterally with the United States, I mean, it really came as no surprise for us. I think it kind of cleaned the air in the alliance for some of us, I must say, without pretending that we're negotiating on missile defense, and at the same time not being able to agree on basic documents with the Russians on as simple as an evaluation of a theater missile defense exercise. It was frustrating, and I think this is just an air clearing step, and we certainly don't see that as a tragedy. I mean, the Russians are going to do what they always did when there's a strategic issue. They always go to Washington. They never go to Brussels. So be it conventional arms control, be it missile defense, be it space-related issues, strategic nuclear weapons, whatever, it's the U.S.-Russia line that's always the important one. Then NATO, then it kind of drops down to the NATO level, and we just work with it at NRC and stuff. Now, just a few, to conclude with, just a few words for the future, the Central European perspective on ballistic missile defense in the future. I think for us, it's very important, although we're not Poles, we're Czechs. It's very important that the Phase 3 is completed in Poland. I think not completing the Phase 3 after the Phase 4 was cancelled would certainly send another bad signal about the U.S. commitment to Central Europe, especially with all the talk of rebalancing the declining U.S. presence in Europe and other things. So we think this would certainly be a very unfortunate move. Now, are we sure that it's not going to happen? I must say, frankly, that we're not. Phase 4 is gone. I mean, the Russians didn't move a finger about that. Okay. I understand that SM-2B block missiles would probably be very expensive to develop as well, so that was another factor. I understand the DPRK danger, and I understand the necessity to strengthen the Alaska GBI installation, but at the same time, it is a signal per se. Now, as soon as Phase 4 was canceled, the Russians started talking about Phase 3. They talk about it in NRC, and I think they're not going to stop anytime soon. Now, what's fueling this debate is a very logical and a very rational NATO and U.S. assertion that if the threat perception changes, if the threat environment changes, and there are profound changes in the threat environment, they might, the U.S. and NATO might recalculate or reassess their missile defense plans. I think this is something that the Russians are building upon when talking about potential canceling the Phase 3. And we're not sure whether the U.S. is going to do that or not. I must say, it's 2018, that's 4 years ahead. I think the Poles are pretty nervous. A couple of other allies are pretty nervous that Phase 3 might not eventually see the light. And there's a lot of temptations on the road. The U.S. has to work with Russians in Syria, in Iran. The U.S. has to work with Russia on a lot of strategic issues, like further strategic nuclear arms reductions, like conventional arms control, space. And the Russians are masters in bundling things together. That is, you want to work with us on missile defense, you're going to work with us on strategic weapons as well, and conventional arms control, and then we're going to help you out with Iran and everything. It's legitimate. It's a strong country. It's an important power, but this is extremely harmful for the discrete and individual files, if you will. So it might happen that Phase 3, under certain political circumstances, might become victim of another round of rapprochement between the powers, and we would not like to see that happen, to be frank. Well, on this, I just wanted to just add a very short remark on Poland, and because the Poles obviously are extremely close to us in terms of security. It was mentioned here that Poland decided to acquire their own missile defense system. This does not relate directly to NATO, but it relates to rather the Polish threat perception there. We've talked a lot about the SS-26 Iskander here. We talked a lot about the Russian countermeasures. Obviously, the decision to acquire these systems is first based on some national security concerns, but at the same time, it also is based on a lack of predictability, as I read it, of possible NATO reactions in terms of harassment from the east for Poland. So I'd suggest that you perceive the Polish acquisition of systems of this kind as another hedge against, let's say, lower predictability of NATO's or other allies' reactions to a possible harassment from the east. And on this happy note, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chalupecky. Now we have